would have been here, but they have both succumbed to the flu. With me are the rest of the commission. And people talk about priorities that this commission has, and fighting opiate addiction is the #1 priority, bar none. Since we started this, the devastation that affects the community as a whole, how it affects our emergency services, how it affects our hospitals is devastating. But more, how it affects individuals. We look around and see people who have lost incredibly. There's a part of us that doesn't understand opiate addiction. We say, why? We hear the stories of people coming to Mission Hospital, one person driving, another person dropping someone off and saying they're overdosing, and then they pull over and overdose themselves. We cannot get our heads wrapped around this. And the reason why? Because this affects the brain the way nothing else can. There's no reason, there's no logic other than the results of opiate addiction is devastating. No one wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to become a heroin addict. No one does that. We know that in Buncombe County, you're more likely to die of a heroin overdose than being hit by a car. We know that 80% of the folks that are addicted to heroin start off with a legal prescription. One of my personal heroes you're going to hear from later on, Ann Seaman. Her son Stuart fought the most valiant, courageous fight against heroin addiction, and he lost. But what we gain is his brave and valiant mother who's willing to tell the story. With us tonight are all the commissioners, and as I said, this is #1 on our goal, and you'll hear from everyone later on. MAHEC has done an incredible job, second to none, educating the public about the addiction of opiates, and you're going to hear incredible information tonight. And when you leave, I hope you are better educated, but more have empathy, that no one chooses this. No one in the world chooses this path. The county has entered into a federal lawsuit against the wholesale distributors and some of the manufacturers. What we know historically, doctors for years were told that if someone's truly in pain, they cannot become addicted. So as much as we want to point fingers at doctors, there's a whole lot more, and it's easy to want to point pictures, but it's getting better. I just talked to a lady tonight whose 13-year-old son was at the ER. He had to have stitches, and he said to the doctor, are you going to prescribe opiates to me? And the doctor said, well, why would you ask that question? And he said, well, I don't want opiates. And the doctor said, how is it that you know, a 13-year-old boy? He said, well, I listen to NPR and I know how bad it is. So I hope that when you're done with the amazing presentation tonight, that you too will carry the message of empathy, innovation, and a priority towards treatment. Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
We're going to go down the list.
Oh, okay. Well, you can put down the list.
So, good evening. My name is Dr. Red Hoffman, and I am a hospice and palliative medicine fellow at MAHEC, and was also trained as a trauma surgeon. So I work at Mission Hospital at night sometimes. And so I picked two fields that are really involved and invested in the opioid crisis. So I'm very honored to be here. This is a really important topic to me. I have Natasha here with me. She's going to be my sidekick. Natasha, can you tell them what you do again, please?
Yeah, so my name is Natasha Penland. There it goes. And I'm a certified peer support specialist. I have been for over 3 years now. And I also work as a family mentor with Buncombe County for the START team, which is the sobriety treatment recovery team.
Thank you. So before I start, I too wanted to just give a shout out to Ann Seaman, who's become a friend of mine. And like we heard, Ann's son Stuart did lose his battle with addiction back in July. And I wanted to just, one, take a moment to dedicate this talk to him, but two, I also want to take a moment for all of us just to remember that as I'm talking about those who are suffering from drug addiction and alcohol addiction and whatever addiction tonight, I just want everyone to remember that these people I'm talking about, they are our brothers and sisters, our sons and our daughters, our husbands and our wives, our fathers, our mothers. There are doctors, our accountants, our lawyers, our friends, our coworkers, they're us. And I just feel like as a human being and also as a physician, I feel very strongly that they deserve the same amount of empathy and love and respect that anyone else deserves. This is a very human epidemic, and as the commissioner said, no one would choose this, no one chooses this life, trust me. So anyway, that's my little spiel. Before we start, I am going to play a video that the students at Asheville High made. So I'm going to see if this works.
All right, you guys are good to go. Here's the prescription for the painkiller. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to go with ibuprofen. I hear it's just as effective as opioids, but it's not as addictive.
Tracy! Grace! Where are you? Grace! Tracy!
So that mom heard my talk and listened. Very excited. Okay. So anyway, we'll get started. I'll start out by talking a little bit about what are opioids, what is this epidemic, not just in North Carolina, but also in the United States. I'll tell you a little bit about how we got here, talk a little bit about how addiction works in our bodies and in our brains, and then talk about what we can do as a community to start fighting or continue fighting this epidemic. So to begin with, what are opioids? So opioids are actually chemicals that are either produced from the one of the species of the poppy plant or are made in the lab. So you can see here, some opioids are prescription medication. So examples are codeine, oxycodone, Vicodin, fentanyl, methadone, morphine. And some other opioids are what we consider illegal drugs. So there's two different kinds of heroin here. The take home from this slide is that regardless of the kind of opioid you put in your body, once it's in your body, it does the same thing. So all the opioids bind to what's called the mu opioid receptor, And that receptor is found in your brain, in your spinal cord, it's found in your gut. And what it does is it basically prevents pain signals from going from your body back to your brain. So that's why it's used as a painkiller. Unfortunately, it also produces a great deal of euphoria, which tends to drive addiction in some people. So this opioid epidemic, what are we talking about? We're calling it an epidemic because the number of people who are dying from drug overdoses, particularly from overdoses of opioids, whether they be prescribed by the doctor, or bought on the street, that number is continuing to rise at an alarming rate. We know that some states have more opioid prescriptions per person than others, and unfortunately, North Carolina is one of those states. So the number of opioid prescriptions per 100 people in North Carolina is between 96 and 143. Between 2014 and 2015, North Carolina was one of 20 states that, that had an increase in the number of drug overdoses related specifically to opioids. So from 2014 to 2015, the opioid overdose rate in North Carolina rose almost 15%. But this is not just a North Carolina problem, this is a United States problem. We basically love our drugs here, and we know we love our opioids. So I think this statistic is amazing. The United States has about 5% of the world's population, but we use 80% of the world's opioid prescriptions. We use 97% of the world's hydrocodone and 99% of the world's Vicodin. I just find that to be absolutely incredible. We know that in 2016, the number of painkillers prescribed in Buncombe County was over 17 million. And this equals 68 pills for every adult and child in Buncombe County. So if you're sitting here, the question, which the commissioner touched on a little bit, is why? Why have doctors been prescribing like it's going out of style, basically? So I'll tell you a little bit how I was trained. You know, back in the 90s, in the mid-90s, pain became the 5th vital sign. So you might notice that when you go to the doctor, who's ever rooming you will look at your heart rate, your blood pressure, your oxygen saturation, and your temperature. And then they always ask you now, what is your pain level? Please rate it on a scale from 0 to 10. And so basically the Joint Commission, which is one of the commissions that doctors really bow down to, told physicians that it is imperative that we treat people's pain. So I think what ended up happening was patients have that expectation that doctors are going to treat their pain and that their pain level is going to be a 0. So I'll let you in on a secret, like doctors are just human beings like everyone else. I want people to like me, I want my patients to like me, I want people to be happy when they leave the office. So what ends up happening is we want to treat your pain. We want you to feel good, and we want you to be a happy customer. So we prescribe more and more opioids. What also happened during my training was I was told, like you heard, that if patients took these medications as prescribed, they would not become addicted. And I can remember, I still remember this, even as late as 2008, rounding in the trauma ICU with very sick, very broken people, with a boss who was very, very smart, and him telling me this same thing. These people will not become addicted to these medicines. So this is what I learned. Unfortunately, we were completely wrong. We now know that for some people, it takes only a little bit to become addicted. So we'll talk a little bit about addiction. So what's interesting is addiction is not necessarily a medical term. The term that we use in medicine right now is substance abuse disorder. But it's basically the same thing. Addiction or substance abuse disorder is a chronic recurring brain disease. And it's characterized by several different actions, including compulsive drug seeking and use, despite harm to oneself or others. It's considered a neurologic disease or a brain disease because it actually changes how the brain works and it changes how the brain looks. So when you look at images of people who are addicted, put them in the MRI machine, show them pictures of drugs, different portions of their brain light up. It's actually, addiction is like a lot of other diseases such as heart disease. Both of them disrupt the normal, healthy functioning of the underlying organ. Both of them have serious, harmful consequences. Both are preventable and treatable, but if these are left untreated, we know that both can become chronic diseases that can either last a lifetime, if you're lucky, or can kill you. So I think this chart speaks a lot to addiction. Let's see here. No, you can't see that on there, sorry. So what this chart is showing is that if you take a prescription pain medicine for 5 days, as prescribed by your physician, the likelihood of you being on opioids, prescription opioids, or unprescribed opioids, 1 year from now is about 7%. If the doctor goes ahead and doubles that prescription, so now they made it for 10 days, and once again, you take it as prescribed by your physician, the likelihood of you being on opioids at 1 year triples to almost 20%. Now, if the doctor takes that prescription and makes it for 30 days, and again, you take these opioids as prescribed by your physician, the likelihood of you being on opioids 1 year from now is between 35 and 40%. So again, we know that for some people, it can take as little as 1 week to become dependent on prescription painkillers. And then once addicted, we know that this person or this patient is going to continually seek to prevent what we know people experience, which are withdrawal symptoms. Others are also trying to just seek the euphoria that they feel at the beginning, before they develop the tolerance, but that unfortunately they're really never able to achieve again. I do want to say though that the situation is not black and white, and that's what makes it hard, I think, for the community and for physicians. Opioids do have their place. Like I said, I work in trauma and I work in hospice and palliative medicine. We probably prescribe more opioids than anybody else. And the reason we prescribe them is because they work. So there is a place for them. If you have an acute traumatic injury, you are going to get opioids, and rightfully so. If you have a family member, I hear this a lot, if you have a family member who's enrolled in hospice, who is perhaps dealing with end-of-life pain from something like cancer, they deserve to not be in pain. And so I have this talk a lot with my patients. What if I get addicted to this morphine that you're giving me? And so sometimes we have to reframe the conversation. We say, what's most important at this point in your life as you're nearing the end of your life? The most important thing for me is that the patient is not in pain. If they develop a tolerance, then so be it. We have bigger fish to fry. So again, it's not all black and white, it's definitely gray. As I said, we all have a role to play in this public health crisis. This affects us all. If it hasn't affected you personally yet, you're just lucky. It eventually will. So what can we do? I think one of the things that we can all do is we can work to reduce the barriers to getting help for addictions. So I'd say one of the biggest barriers that people face is stigma. Stigma because somehow in our minds we've decided that this disease is different than all other diseases. We can reduce this stigma by helping others, by reminding ourselves that there isn't anything inherently wrong with someone or with their family who is addicted to drugs. I think we can also emphasize that addiction is not a moral failing. The negative public perceptions that surround addiction really make it difficult for individuals or their families to admit that there is an issue or to reach out for help. We know that addiction is not curable, but it is treatable. But the reality is, if you don't treat it, you have a high likelihood of dying from this disease. So I think this quote brings home kind of the power of addiction. This is a quote from this woman who was on Frontline, and she says, "Heroin literally has a brain, and it shares mine." And again, it drives home the fact that unlike some other chronic diseases, this is a chronic disease of the brain. Again, it not only affects the structure, it affects the structure of the brain, which is really like the most amazing thing. And then because the structure is affected, it affects the function of the brain. And from there, it affects all of your decision making. And suddenly this person who you know and who you love is literally not in their right mind anymore, because that's what drugs do to your brain. So this is an obituary from 2017. This was in the Asheville Citizen Times that highlights the deadly consequences of addiction. And this gentleman, Seth, passed away or died from an overdose. And Seth's mother gave us permission to share this. She, like Anne, wants to help bring the disease of addiction into the light, because that's where the cure is. So again, science reveals that substance use disorders are chronic brain diseases that can be managed with medical treatment. They are not moral failings or character flaws. We know that we need to reduce the negative public perception surrounding addictions, because that's how people are going to get help. Right now we know that only 1 in 10 Americans with a drug addiction actually gets the help they need. If I were here telling you that 1 in 10 cancer patients was getting the help that they needed, we would be in an uproar. And somehow, in our minds, in the public perception, this is somehow different. Yet it's not. Again, going back to the opioid overdose problem. So prescription, you can see in the green, this is commonly prescribed opioids and the number of people who have overdosed yearly in North Carolina. We can see that that number stayed pretty stable. However, in the blue, we see the number of people who are overdosing from other opioids like heroin. And we can see that that number, especially in 2015 and in 2016, rose rapidly. And like we heard, the likelihood of dying from a drug overdose at this point in Buncombe County is higher than the likelihood of dying by getting hit by a car. I'll tell you, as a trauma surgeon, that's absolutely staggering to me. We also know that people between the ages of 25 to 34 make up the majority of opioid-related deaths in North Carolina. We also know that it doesn't take a lot to kill. So one thing I want to say, if there's parents in the room, it's easy to, in some ways, think back. We all have our histories, and so some of them we don't want to share with our kids. So sometimes I think it's easy to look back and think, well, I did this or I did that back in the day. But I think one thing that's really important to know is that the drugs that are out there today are stronger and are more available than they were 30 years ago. So we don't even know what our kids are getting. It's dangerous. It's easy to write it off, but I think that at least my experience in the hospital is I see people overdose who've done drugs for like 3 months. So these aren't like hardcore addicts. These are young kids who just started using drugs and who are now in the ICU brain dead and who are becoming organ donors. So what's going on, I think, partially is as the prescription opioids are becoming less available because the laws are getting stricter and because physicians are being told that they cannot prescribe as many opioids anymore, we know that people are turning to street drugs. What this slide shows is that our heroin that we get, if we're getting it, can be laced with things like fentanyl or carfentanil. So fentanyl is a drug I use in the ICU all the time. It's like 100 times stronger than morphine. It's a great drug if you're in the ICU and you need to have great pain control. Just a few drops of fentanyl sprinkled into heroin can cause a fatal overdose. And the reality is no one knows, no one's telling you what you're getting. No one knows what they're getting. And this is how a lot of these overdoses are happening. And then what's even worse is this carfentanil, which you might have heard about on the news. That's like an elephant tranquilizer. So that's like 1,000 times more potent than fentanyl. And again, one drop of this on someone can cause an overdose. So we know that this epidemic is everywhere in our community. It's in our doctor's offices, it's in our schools, it's in our workplace, it's in our homes, it's in our families, and it's in our hearts. In North Carolina, from 2004 to 2013, there has been a 604, not 64, 604% increase in hospitalizations associated with drug withdrawals in newborn babies. 600. We know that in 2015, almost 400 babies born at Mission Hospital tested positive for substances. And again, these mothers deserve our love and our compassion and support. I mean, mark my words that no pregnant mom would ever be saying, one, I want to be addicted to heroin, and two, I would like my child to be addicted to heroin too. If we do not reduce the stigma and do not show these patients the love and support that they need, more and more children are going to be ending up with this problem. So another statistic, from January to August 2017, there have been 230 opioid overdose ER visits in Buncombe County. This was compared to just 84 visits from January to August 2016. So I'll tell you, not all of these opioid overdose visits lead to death. In Buncombe County in 2016, according to the state medical examiner, there were 31 heroin-related deaths. That being said, we don't even know how many people are truly overdosing. We do know that there's a lot of people in the community who have Narcan, which is a great drug. It can reverse heroin overdose. However, a lot of those people who get Narcan will just go on to overdose again. So we don't know what's happening out on the street. We just know what's happening in the emergency department for right now. We do know that 17 out of 23 Western North Carolina counties ranked among the top in the state for overdose deaths. And again, for each person that dies, 16 more visit the emergency department. So does any of this information surprise you? Well, I guess not. All right, so the question becomes, well, this is a question I would be thinking, is, well, who is going to become an addict? And I think if we could answer that question, we'd all be rich and like famous, because we'd be really preventing a disease. The problem is we don't know. But we do know that there are things that put people at risk. So this study came out a couple years ago. I've heard this study is on adverse childhood experiences, and I heard it described as like the most underquoted important study to come out in the last decade. But basically it said that those who have experienced either abuse, neglect, or household dysfunction, so growing up in a house that has mental illness, or divorce, substance abuse, or in a household with someone where there was an incarcerated relative, all of these people have a higher likelihood of addiction, of developing addiction. We know in North Carolina that for children ages 1 through 17, almost 50% of those children have at least one adverse childhood experience. We also know for that same age group in North Carolina that almost 25% of children have at least 2 adverse childhood experiences. And interestingly, both of those statistics are higher than the national average. So age is also a risk factor. What do we know? We know that 90% of adults with substance use disorder or substance abuse disorder started using drugs before they were 18 years old. And that half of these adults actually started using drugs before the age of 15. So, unfortunately, being a teenager puts you at greater risk. The teenage brain is often relying more on impulse and emotions than on rational decision making, especially when it is under stress or under other influences like peer pressure. Who else is at risk? We know that if you are a male, a white male or a Native American male between the ages of 25 and 34, you are more likely to die of a drug overdose in North Carolina as well. Hold on a moment. Okay. So, what can we do? One, we can talk to our kids. Okay, again, that's like a pretty simple answer. So when I grew up in the 80s, it was like, just say no to drugs. So that didn't really work out too well for anyone. And then we have DARE, and we have Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And none of this really worked. So I do feel like talking is important. One of the things we need to talk about is the fact that it's not just street drugs like pot and heroin and everything else we talked about, but it's also pills. And pills are everywhere. They're in your pill cabinet usually. We need to let our kids know that all these drugs, once they're in our bodies, do exactly the same things. And like I talked to you before, today's drugs are stronger and different and more easily accessible than ever before. But I think the other thing we need to do, besides warn our kids about drugs, is we need to know ourselves and know our kids. So again, if you had one of these, or 2 of these, or 3 of these, or 5 of these adverse childhood experiences, I'm not saying that you're going to become an addict. I'm saying that you have a higher risk, that we need to know ourselves. We need to know that maybe our children, because of things way out of our control, are at higher risk as well. And I feel like being open and honest and mindful of those who are at greater risk can help us kind of stave off potential issues. So, Natasha, I'm going to ask you, because I think this is important, how do we know when people are using?
So I have some experience with this, right? I'm just going to touch on some of the stuff that's up there. So opiate, one of the really easy signs is the eyes, right? So pinpointed pupils. Now different drugs give different symptoms, but we're talking about opiates today. So if somebody's abusing opiates, you're going to see pinpointed pupils, you're going to see a lot of the iris. You can even see like red around the eyes. It's going to be pretty obvious. They're going to say they're really sleepy. That was a really favorite excuse of mine, I'm tired, right? Running out of prescriptions early, this would probably be really early in this addiction process. If they're still getting a prescription, you know, and you're finding that, you know, they're having to call in refills, or, you know, you get the excuse, I lost them. I can't find them. Somebody stole them.
People never lose their medication for like their reflux, but they always lose their opioid prescription. It's absolutely amazing.
Imagine that. Unkempt, dirty appearance. This is something that just kind of goes along with the lifestyle of abusing drugs. All that stuff, those daily routines, they fall to the wayside. We're not taking care of ourselves as much. I know that was something for me, you know, wearing the same clothes over and over again, not washing my hair, I stopped wearing makeup, things like that. Those little behavior changes are going to be, you know, signs for you to be looking out for. Missing appointments or family functions. you don't want to be around people that are going to be able to call you out or tell that something is going on. There's a lot of shame and guilt involved with using a lot of times, and they're not going to want to show that in front of their family. Excuses about appearance or behaviors. You know, we're not blind that we're changing some of our behaviors. And, you know, a lot of times families sit in denial for a while. They don't want to think that that's what's really going on. And so you might have a question, but if you don't verbalize that, if you don't call them out and you sweep it under the rug, it's just going to progress further, and it's going to be less of a chance you're going to be able to help them before it gets really bad. Uncharacteristic behaviors. So, you know, if this person was really outgoing and super sociable and was doing good grades, maybe they're still in school, or just had a lot of friends, and then all of a sudden they're not hanging out with their best friend anymore. They're not getting along, or they have a really bad toxic relationship. Things like that. You guys know that these are people that are in our families, or our friends, or our coworkers. You know, this is not somebody way down in another town that you're never going to run across. These are people that you see and are around every day. You're going to be able to tell. Follow your instincts, right? Isolation that goes along with it, with the shame and the guilt. And then cash flow issues and missing valuables. I mean, you know, they have to sustain their addiction at some point. You know, maintaining a job and having money coming in sometimes is an issue. And then the missing of burnt spoons and foil, that's just, you know, the paraphernalia that kind of goes along with using heroin. If you find your spoons are missing, you might want to be asking some questions. You know, and again, I just really want to highlight that this is, you know, these are people in your community. These are people that you have touched, you know, passed with, that you know, may know from a long time ago, and then all of a sudden they're a different person. There's reasons for that. You know, they're struggling and they might not know how to say it. But it will always help just to be there for them, to support them, not to shame them. You know, this isn't a choice. This is a disease. And you can't tell always from the outside. You can't tell if somebody sitting next to you has diabetes or if they have heart disease. It's the same line of thinking.
Thanks, Natasha. So I think one thing that Natasha said that bears repeating is trust your instincts. I'd say to the parents in the room, you know your kids. I'd say to people who have partners who may be using, you know your partner. Addicts are, I said this last time I talked, I think addicts are like the most amazing, creative, crafty people. They will spin a tale like you would not believe. And I mean that like with all my heart, and I think they're amazing. And if they use their powers for good, it would be really amazing. But they will tell you a story and convince you that you're the one going crazy. Trust your instincts. Again, they're not coming from their right minds. It's really important that you stay in your right mind and in your power. So again, kind of going back to what we can do. One thing that I think I can hopefully empower all of you to remember is that prescription painkillers should really be a last resort. Again, for people who have had a traumatic injury, I think that there's a place for painkillers. For my surgical patients, I think that there is a place for some painkillers. And again, for people at end of life, I think there's a place for as much painkillers as they want. But what can you do? One, you can actually be asking the doctor to talk to you about the risks associated with prescription painkillers. And two, you can be asking, when can I switch to Tylenol and Advil? So I'll show you this study. This study was so cool. It actually showed that one tablet of ibuprofen, 200 milligrams, and one tablet of Tylenol, 500 milligrams, taking that together, 62 out of 100 people, so 62% of people had better pain control than taking 5 milligrams of oxycodone. So I just think that's absolutely incredible. The other thing that's going on right now is the University of Michigan is doing a lot of work on prescription pain medicines. And so they are doing studies to help us as surgeons decide what really is the right amount of pain pain pills to be giving after surgery. So I'll tell you, I did not learn this in medical school or residency. I kind of just did whatever I wanted. And a lot of it depended on my mood and whether I liked the patient. I mean, this is it's very subjective, and I've heard crazy subjective stories. Now we're finding that for when you get your appendix out, which is one of the most common general surgery procedures, I used to send patients home with 30 pills of oxycodone, of 5 milligrams oxycodone. The University of Michigan is finding that now we can send people home with 10 pills of oxycodone, so 20 pills less. And the reality is we're also finding that many people don't take all the pills that are prescribed. A lot of those pills end up being diverted. They're stolen, they're kind of borrowed by family members. So I think by doing this work and helping physicians educate themselves about what is the appropriate number, we're also trying to be a part of the solution. The other thing that physicians are doing, in North Carolina, the STOP Act, it was passed in 2017, but just went into action on January 1st, 2018. And it actually, through the legislature, now says that we are only allowed to prescribe 5 days of opioids for pain, for acute pain, and 7 days of opioids for post-surgical pain. It also mandates that all physicians look up in this amazing registry, it's the prescription provider database, I'm forgetting the name of it, where we can see all the prescriptions that everyone has gotten over the last several years, when they were filled, what doctor wrote them. So it's tasking physicians with being more mindful about the amount of opioids that they're putting out into the community. I'm hopeful that over time, this will also help reduce this crisis. Other things I think we can remember, going back to that whole idea that pain is the 5th vital sign, I think, unfortunately, being human comes with a certain amount of pain, and it's unfortunate but true. Emotional pain and physical pain. I think the expectation that our pain should be 0 is probably not realistic. And so I try to help my patients, one, find other ways to cope with their pain, to perhaps reframe it in a way, and then encourage them to use other modalities to help with their pain. So things like physical therapy is absolutely amazing. Learning exercises that you can do at home, doing yoga, doing acupuncture. All of these can help reduce the amount of opioids that we're using. Other steps that you can use to help. One, if you have anyone else in your house, whether they're children or other adults, I think it's worth being mindful of the number of painkillers in your home. If you get a prescription for 30 and the next day there's 25, no one lost them. They didn't just fall into the toilet bowl, and I doubt the dog ate them. Someone's using them. They'll tell you every other story. 2, secure your pills. So one of the things we do with our hospice patients is we will give them a lockbox to put their pills in. So at least it acts as a deterrent. We still have people try, unfortunately, to take some of those medications, but it just puts an extra step in there. Again, if you're not acting from your right brain, sometimes you just need that extra step for someone to get in your way. So we can do that for people by putting our meds in a lockbox. You can also drop off your unused pills, and I'll have a list of places where you can drop them off. You can also take your pills, crush them up, mix them with coffee grounds, and then throw them out, or mix them with kitty litter and throw them out. No one's going to want to use them, trust me. And again, you can ask your friends and family to do the same. So these are some places in Buncombe County where you can safely and anonymously dispose of prescription drugs. They do not have to be your prescription drugs. No one's coming and watching. It's really a community effort to just get them off the street. I love VIA. I think that they are, is anyone here from VIA? Well, they're awesome. An amazing resource, this number, 1-800-849-6127. So I actually called it the other night for one of my patients who was looking for methadone maintenance. It's just a great resource, a great clearinghouse for all things drugs, mental health, that questions that you might, it's a good place to start if you don't know where to start, and they're there 24 hours a day. So one thing we know is that addiction is an ongoing progressive disease. We also know that recovery and relapse unfortunately go hand in hand. So often relapse is a part of someone's recovery, and oftentimes there's many relapses that have to happen before a sustainable recovery occurs. So that's why harm reduction is also a really important part of this discussion. So harm reduction says that we know that human beings may be doing some things that are not in their best interest, but we want to support those human beings in being as healthy as possible while they are doing these things. So that's where the idea for syringe exchange comes. So for anyone who doesn't believe in syringe exchange, I would say to you, unfortunately, you can't, if someone is using drugs and gets hepatitis C and then tries to get clean, it's a whole lot harder than if they don't have hepatitis C. And I see this all the time. So there's some people in the community who don't support syringe exchange because they think it may be encouraging drug use. I would say it's just keeping our addicts safe and disease-free until they can get clean, so that hopefully one day they can have a beautiful life that has nothing to do with hepatitis or HIV. So there is free syringe exchange at the Steady Collective and also free Narcan. So Ann may speak to this, but anyone who knows anyone who is using opioids should have Narcan around. Narcan is, well, I'll tell you, it's amazing because it will reverse the effects of opioids, so it can get you out of your overdose. The bad thing about it is it only lasts 30 minutes. So many times in the medical community, we will see someone get a shot of Narcan, come out of their overdose, and then 30 minutes later, when the Narcan wears off, they go back into their overdose. And people can still die from an overdose like that. It's not a cure-all, but again, it's a way a dead addict can't get clean. So it's just a way to keep people alive until they can get the help that they need. And then again, free HIV and hepatitis C testing. The one thing that we want to avoid is if we're using syringes, we do not want to be using dirty syringes, and we do not want to be passing communicable diseases amongst ourselves, because again, my hope would be that all addicts not only get clean, but get clean and live like a healthy, productive, amazing life. So 3 ways each of us can help. 1, we can continue to talk about this as a health epidemic. Again, not a moral failing, but a true health epidemic with ourselves, our children, our friends, our coworkers. 2, like Natasha talked about, we can know the signs and symptoms of addiction. We can continue to trust our instincts. If you think something's wrong with someone you love, something is wrong with someone you love. Call that 800 number just as a place to start. And we can support those in search of recovery. And then lastly, we can decrease the number of prescription painkillers in our community. So 1, as a physician, I'm trying to do my part. 2, as a patient, you can be asking your doctor, what are the other ways to deal with pain? Secure the painkillers that you have, or get rid of them if you're not using them. That is it for my talk. I'm going to open this for any questions. Yes, sir.
I'll stand up and say this. Sometime back, in the last 6 months, there was an article in the Asheville Citizen Times that said that physician, when he prescribed opioids, that he felt like that he couldn't supply the time to educate the client or the patient on the dangers of opioids. Would you care to comment on that?
Sure. I would say that is an unfortunate part of medicine, that often we don't have time, as much time as we want with our patients. I think that's why part of the solution to this epidemic is, though physicians may have had a huge part in starting it, I think the entire community is going to have a large part in stopping it. So I'm lucky that in my palliative care clinic, I get an hour with each patient, and I certainly talk to them about the pros and cons of opioids, but I know that many of my colleagues in family medicine get like 15 minutes with their patients. That's why we as a community also need to be talking about this. And again, I encourage everyone to be talking to your neighbors about, well, why are you still on those pain meds? Like, I don't think that's a rude question to ask. It can come from a place of love and support, like, oh, has your doctor talked to you about this alternative or physical therapy or something like that? Yes?
About 3 years ago, I had a student who I had taught her when she was in 5th grade, and she came back to me some 20 years later, almost. And she was addicted and using, and had, for whatever reason, by the second day that she was in our club, needed help and was willing to get help. And I took her to what used to be Minnie Jones, and they were wonderful and they were great getting her in the door. She went back for a consultation. They brought her back to me and they said, we can't do anything. She is using too much for her to withdraw with us. So I got on the phone in the parking lot of Minnie Jones, and I called and I called and I called. Black Mountain was 2 or 3 weeks away at best for a bed. The hospitals would not take her unless she said that she was suicidal, and she wasn't willing to do that. At this point, her child was being kept by her parent, and if she admitted to being suicidal, faking it, and saying, oh, I'm suicidal, let me in for treatment, then she was fearful that she would lose her child to her ex. We're talking about a 23-year-old beautiful girl who had a car accident and went from opioid and just kept going. And prescription painkillers for her and continued to go. She left that parking lot that day, and she didn't make it. And I made over, within, just in that parking lot, and the next 24 hours, I guarantee you, I called every person that I hoped. I called hospitals, I called ERs, I called friends that worked in the medical field, I called one of you and I got nowhere. I was given names and I was given telephone numbers and I got nowhere. And so my question is, I think this is wonderful. We live in the best community that there has ever been to be dealing with this crisis. But we're at this point where we're saying, okay, we recognize it, we see it, we're losing our family members, we're losing mothers who are looking up and saying, I don't want to do this, I don't want to die this way. What are we supposed to do there? Because I was told repeatedly that if I took her to the hospital, that they didn't have a detox available for her. If she was an alcoholic, they could detox. My question is there a solution yet? Is there somewhere I should have taken her? And if there isn't, is there now? And if there's not, what can we do to change that? What can we add that to the conversation? Narcan is amazing. I've seen it work. I was told by the person that trained us to use it, that if you're wrong and it's not an opioid overdose, they're going to have one hell of a bad headache and you're good. You know, so all of these things are great things for us to do and great tools. But the one tool that I don't feel comfortable with You have a very small window to move fast. And if you can't get help within that window, you're buried. And so that, it's not really a question, I guess. Is there somewhere, is there a way that we can? If by God's grace somebody looks up and says, yeah, I'm ready, where do we go? Because I can't afford to spend 3 days on the phone trying to find a way to save somebody who is already back and ODing in the process.
So there is now something that there wasn't just even a couple years ago. It's called, we call it the B-Hook. It's the Behavioral Health Urgent Care. It is a place that is designed to divert people from the ER that can come there just for crisis stabilization or that are seeking detox. It is some place that they can assess them and do a quick triage there to see what kind of services they need, and then put out multiple referrals. It's a 23-hour and 59-minute, 24-hour bed, or basically chair. They can stay there for that long while they're trying to connect them with services, whether it be, okay, you know, outpatient is appropriate for you, or inpatient. They have peer support there. The peer living room is also connected to it, and that stays open now 7 days a week, and it's open until 11 p.m. You know, I know that getting somebody into treatment is important, but when things don't work out like that, there are still other resources in the community that can help support them until maybe they're able to, you know, wean themselves down so they can meet the criteria to get into a detox facility. There's so many different 12-step fellowships in this community that can support an addict that's in need, that if they're willing to ask for help, even if they can't get into a facility, help is still available in different forms. So I would suggest things like that.
So where is this place, Natasha?
The B-Hook is at 356 Biltmore Avenue. It's connected to the RHA services. It's called C3 at 356. You're welcome.
The county opened that 2 years ago, but I'd also like to recognize the fact we all need to be advocates. Senator Terry Van Dyne is here, and we need to be advocates to tell all of our legislatures that stopping treatment midstream for addiction is not acceptable. You would never do that to someone with cancer, and not treating mental health and addiction is equally egregious. So we need to be strong advocates over people that control purse strings, because we know it is expensive. But we have to be advocates and push our legislatures, whatever level they're in, that this is a priority. This is killing us without enough resources, so people that when they want to get better, they can.
Yes, sir.
My name is Michael Harney. I was a co-founder and operator of the Needle Exchange Program of Asheville, so I thank you so much for addressing the issue. We began in 1994 to operate what we call the Needle Exchange Program of Asheville. And back then, I really believed it would have taken no more than 2 years that the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services would have implemented this across the state. It took until 2016 for it to become legalized in the state of North Carolina. And so I'd like to give you my vision that all 85 county health departments, because some are, we have 100 counties, but some are, they collaborate in 2 or 3 county areas. So there are 85 locations where it seems to me we could operate legally now that the STOP Act has changed the funding stream availability. So the legal needle exchange in 2016 restricted any public funds from being used to purchase hypodermic syringes or any other supplies and implements. The STOP Act in 2017 allowed for state, not for state funds to be used, but instead maybe open it up so that county and city funding could be used. I would like to see that all 85 counties operate stigma-free, healthy, friendly places where people could get needle access, dispose of them properly so they're not throwing them in the trash, not flushing them down the toilets, that maintenance doesn't have to worry about it in housing, neighborhoods and in our general streets, that sort of thing. But I'd like to put the county commissioners on the spot right now. Will you commit to at least Buncombe County being a major model for the state of North Carolina to operate through its health department a legal needle exchange program that would allow people to come in and see a nurse, talk to them about an abscess, get a free HIV or hepatitis C test, make sure that they're disposing needles properly, maybe have access to Narcan. The clippers that the sheriff so kindly donated now are going out from our agency and the Steady Collective and the health department, where people are actually clipping the needles off to reduce the risk. Eventually, we may need to have what are called the legal syringe facilities where people injection facilities. I know it's far-fetched to believe that we would ever do that in this country, but it's in the news now in Philadelphia, in New York, and in Washington State. Perhaps we can at least take some steps here at the county level to commit to funding that the Buncombe County Department of Health and Human Services become that model for the rest of the state. Thank you.
County Commissioners, what say you?
I'm going to speak for myself, and that Buncombe County Health and Human Services has always been ahead of the fold, ahead of the curve. The resources of Buncombe County are bar none. Lisa Eby is here with us tonight. Bar none to anything. I'm not going to speak for any other commissioners, but I'm thoroughly supportive of that. But what I will tell you, all the commissioners are very supportive of stopping addiction, but I don't want to speak for them.
And I do speak for myself. I understand, but she's right. Lisa Eby and them, as far as what we have in our health department already, there is a needle exchange deal already. So what are we doubling down for? We're going to do what it takes. I'm not sitting up here. I haven't went to 4 of these things for the fun of it. We want everybody to be well, period. I do. I don't think there's a commissioner up here. But just saying that we're going to do something that we're already doing, that's just putting more fairy dust out there. That's the way I look at it. And I'm not into fairy dust. I'm into facts. And the facts is Buncombe County is doing its job at the present time. So it don't need me to tell it how to do it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I noticed you mentioned. Hello, everybody. I had noticed you mentioned the alternatives and that y'all were making cutbacks and how much you prescribe. But for people with acute pain, have y'all considered not giving opioids at all sometimes?
I'm very into what's called multimodal therapy, which is using different medicines like gabapentin, using Tylenol, using Toradol, which is a really strong anti-inflammatory, and trying to get at those different receptors. So I definitely try that first, but I also acknowledge that pain is real and that sometimes I'm the cause of that pain, so I certainly want to treat it. So I think a lot of it is, it's a negotiation.
I'd like to add to that as well, that I don't want to put all of the responsibility onto the physicians, that it is us as patients and people to take responsibility to advocate for ourselves and say, I don't want that, I don't need that. Can we explore other options? I can tell you more than once in recovery that I've had to remind my constant primary care physician that I can't take that stuff. And it's not that, he's trying to push the drugs on me, it's just not something that a lot of people will say, that, hey, I don't want that cough syrup with codeine, hey, I don't want that muscle relaxer, I don't need that pain pill. So it's not just their responsibility not to offer it, it's our responsibility to say that we don't need it and we don't want it either.
Yeah.
Commissioner Frost, I want to applaud your passion for the opioid abuse and the problems that we have in the county. One of the things that, with all due respect, I don't think that we're ahead of the curve. We're not where we need to be as a county. I don't know exactly how we get there. I just know that with 17 million pills out there, enough for every child and every adult in this county, we are way behind. We have to look for ways that we can address this as a commission, not only as a commission, but at the state level, federal level as well. You guys cannot do it all, and I know that you would like to if you could, but we're way behind the curve. We need to do things. Rather than came out with the law, keeps you guys at 5 days. That's a start. But we are so far behind now, I think we're first. Okay, so we have a lot of work to do, and I think that we have to sit down and figure out ways, and forums like this where we can actually get people together and come up with ideas. That's the way that we're going to make things happen. It's not going to happen behind closed doors in meetings. It's going to have to involve the public, and we're also going to have to give them ways and take ideas from them that will help us understand just what we can do as a community, not just occasionally, or like the lady over here who I can't imagine going through what you have to go through, knowing that you need help, so not knowing where to get it, not knowing how to go about doing that. So, this is a good way to start. It's a good thing to do, but we've got to do something fast, and we've got to act with more people involved.
I've worked with the criminal justice population probably for 15 years, and so one of the dilemmas or challenges that we continue to face is the administration of any kind of MAT-related treatment while you're in the detention center. Now, I know Rutherford County is in the process or has started a pilot program that is doing this now. I think they're administering Vivitrol. Is that something that Buncombe County is considering or had conversations about?
So the programs that are in the jail itself strictly are under the jurisdiction of the existing sheriff. What Buncombe County has done, we started the Justice Resource Center, and we've worked aggressively with the DA to get people out of the jail who don't belong there into alternative sentencing and treatment. We opened the Justice Resource Center last fall, and we are doing everything legally that's in our jurisdiction to attack this.
So, and I'd like to address the gentleman here who brought up a good point. When you look nationally, we're not where we should be. But I think what we've got to do is more forums like here tonight. But what opened my eyes early on in January, I'd only been a commissioner for maybe a month or a little more, maybe it was February. Jasmine Beach Ferreira, who has the flu, is not here. She's my partner. She's the other commissioner in District 1. We've been going around the district every 2 months, meeting from Emma, Stevensley, you name it, and we will continue that. And what got me really involved in this is the first meeting we had. And we were at the West End Bakery in West Asheville. When a lady was there, you know, you go to meetings and sometimes you can see people who seem something's not right. And I guess that comes from me. I have a knack from 40 years working with the public. But I knew something was wrong, so after we finished, I walked up to her. And what hit me between the eyes was that weekend, we had 3 people to die of overdose in Buncombe County. Their daughter was one of them. And you know, what can you say? All you can do is, you know, we hugged her and tried to console her the best we could. But it opened my eyes early on that what we've got to do is more what we're doing here. A lot of it is going to be information, or like when I was in the Navy and we said all hands on deck. Folks, it's going to take all of us in the community to turn this around. And let's face it, unfortunately it didn't happen overnight, and it's not going to be corrected overnight. But until we start doing what we're doing now, we're not going to get to the end of this tunnel. And this is what we've started, and this is the key. But folks, for me, and I think, thank goodness, with my family, it started early on. When I was in the 4th grade, now this will tell you, you know, for me, that was a long time ago. This has been going on a long time. I have a good friend of mine to this day. We talk about once a month, both retired now. But he moved to Asheville to stay with his aunt and uncle when we were in the 4th grade at St. Anthony's School. I knew that, you know, he was having problems, I could tell. He came in early on in the year. And as we got close, we became good friends. About May, or just before school was out, he told me that he moved to Asheville because his mom and dad had divorced. And here's a kid in the first month, a few weeks of being in the 4th grade in New York City. He went in after school, found his mom dead with a needle in her arm. And I remember talking to my mom at that time, and I said, I'm sorry to hear that, you know, that I called my friend's name, that his mom was a drug addict. And I remember it like it was yesterday. Mom looked at me and she put her arms around me and said, son, no, she was a sick lady. And you know, that's always stuck with me. And I always said, at some point in time in this country, we have got to get our arms around it. And back at that time, it was mostly in the black communities in the cities. Nobody cared. Nobody gave a damn, let's face it. But by not doing anything then, when we could have corrected it a lot easier than we can now, look at what's happened. But it all comes, I don't care what we say or what we do, but we need to make sure that all of us are informed and we know what goes on. And we've got to make sure that all our kids we talk to and grandkids are involved. You know, my grandson who has sickle cell doesn't hesitate to tell the doctor, no, I don't want all those pain pills. And you know, that little fella's in pain a lot. And he can come up here and tell you a lot about it just because he's been informed. But just to answer your question, I hope I'm not making it too broad, but we got to do more of what we're doing here tonight. And we can't continue to push this under the rug, you know, because people are sick and addicted, keep them in a closet, so to speak. This is something we got to talk about, not only with our friends, but with family members. You know, I've got another good friend whose son graduated with honors from Stanford and got his MBA from Wharton School of Business, two of the top schools in the country. He died at 27 years old, the old OD. So it's affected all of us. But it's time for us to do what we're doing tonight and be open and honest about it. And sure, I agree, we've got to do more as a county. We've got to do more as a legislature in the state and in Washington and all. But when you get right down to it, it's got to start with us. And this is what we're trying to do. We've got to be open and honest, and it's going to be some tough decisions. And we've got to expect that. But we've got to do it. And believe me, I can say for the 7 of us, it's a good team up here, although 2 are sick, but when we're together, we're committed to doing something in Buncombe County. You know, we're going to take the lead one way or the other, but we cannot sit here 10 years from now or 5 years from now and talk about the same problem and see the number of people who we have died in this county. It's totally unacceptable.
Thank you.
Thank you for a great presentation. I'm Peter Strong. I'm a retired addiction psychiatrist. I worked 13 years at Hartford Dispensary, which is an opiate treatment program in Connecticut. For Dr. Hoffman and one for the commissioners. With Dr. Hoffman, with the study that you showed, that showed us acetaminophen and ibuprofen work better than any dose up to 15 milligrams of oxycodone. You'll find that in every single study you see, if it's a well-run study. Why send your patients home with any oxycodone? That's one. Second, for the commissioners, probably more importantly, Hartford Dispensary was a not-for-profit. I believe that the methadone programs in North Carolina are for-profit. I have experience with both. Hands down, patient experience and not-for-profit is better, more effective, more cost-effective for the community. What is the status of moving towards not-for-profit methadone programs here in Asheville? Thank you.
This is something that we are exploring, and as Commissioner Fryer said, we have a lot of things on the table, but we are intrigued by the difference of non-for-profit methadone clinics and for-profit. There seems to be a world apart, including the dosage.
Dosage is not the issue. I'm not sure what you mean by methadone dosage. Oftentimes, methadone dose is kept too low. The issue is how the patient feels going in. Do they feel like a patient, or do they feel like in a part of the medical industrial complex?
No, I hear what you're saying, and I don't want to get too into the weeds because we have more people that want to ask questions, but we have everything on the table that we're exploring.
I also want to encourage anyone, such as the gentleman here and also the Needle Exchange, to come to the commission meeting. You can come at any time, and during public comment, you can speak on anything for 3 minutes. It does help the commissioners for this to be continually providing information to us so that it keeps that fresh. It's very fresh to each of you because that's your calling, your charge, whatever it might be. But continue to bring this information to us at the meetings and continue to speak to us and provide this so that we can file it away, so we can create that memory. I've been to, I guess this is my 4th one. I went to 2 of the Commissioner Frost and Fryer, their events, and then there was one out in Candler at a church, and I see one of our workers in Candler here that's a volunteer and very passionate in this, and so continue to do that. It's very, very helpful to us.
We need you all to speak up. When is that meeting?
They're every 2 weeks. They're posted. You can go to buncombecounty.org and see under commissioners. You go to commissioners' agendas. You can hit it, and you can see previous meetings, and you can see future dates, and you can come and you can speak and we encourage. So you might need to come a few times to get your message across, but we do encourage you to do that.
Yes.
My name is Hope, and I just wanted to share. I lost my sister to a drug overdose almost 11 years ago, and I've been in recovery in addiction for years in my life now. But I wanted to applaud Buncombe County for letting there be a drug treatment court here. I'm in that program right now and set to graduate this Friday, and like I said, I've been in recovery for years, and I know that I credit my amount of clean time right now to the drug treatment court program, and I wouldn't have been able to do it. I have 21 months clean now, and I know that like a lot of positive and negative things have been said tonight, but I just wanted to state a positive thing that recovery is possible, and it's good to see everyone together working on the situation. Like, unfortunately, there's not just one Band-Aid that's going to fix it.
Yeah.
There's people recovering in so many different ways, and I think it's great that Asheville and Buncombe County is open to all the different ways that people recover.
Thanks for sharing your story.
My name's Cole. I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and I do feel for this state as a whole because the same problems happening in Virginia as well as Richmond. Benzos and heroin is rampant right now. I do agree with the speaker on the recovery process is very crucial. If you don't do good in recovery, the chances of failing and relapsing are very, very high, and then that causes death, obviously, which we do not want. But the pattern I've seen is the addiction is starting in the doctor offices. It's starting in, when people are having surgery or having back issues, whatever it is, broken legs. And I know the pharmaceutical industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that's hard to go after, but my question for the speaker and everyone sitting is, how willing is this state to combat the pharmaceutical industry if the origin is starting there? And I know, obviously North Carolina has not made of money, nor is Virginia, but it's a nationwide issue. And what I would like to know is how willing are you guys to go after the source and the origin of the problem? Because if not, we can sit here all day and talk about it, but nothing's going to change.
Buncombe County was the first county in the state to file a federal lawsuit against
And I just wanted to add that the Attorney General of North Carolina has also filed suit. So that's at the state level.
Okay. So there's a little town in Welch, West Virginia that was one of the first to sue and take on the big farm. That is my hometown. I went back for many, many years and watched the county deteriorate. It's very heartbreaking. It motivates you as a citizen or a commissioner. These experiences shape you. Thank you for the comment on drug treatment court. I've had an opportunity to attend one of those graduations. They're fantastic. And the people there, you know them. This is some of your hometown, whether it be Candler or wherever. And I'm the last thing we would want to do is take credit for anything. So there's nothing that should be directed up here. We're trying to take the experiences that's in our past or in our community and share them with Health and Human Services, share them with legislators, share them with senators, share them with doctors, and part of it is just what you're doing here tonight is fantastic. And we just appreciate you coming and sharing your experiences with us so we can continue to be educated, continue to do more.
We're going to do 2 more questions.
One minute before question. We have some people in the audience that's part of, what's your group? Sunrise. Would you please stand up? She was at an event at Fairview, because we've done Black Mountain, Fairview, and Boyverville. Very pleased to have her. She did an awesome job, and I really want to thank you and understand what you've gone through. So, people in here, please give her another applause.
Yeah, we have the mic.
Okay. So back to the question about criminal justice involvement, and I realize that the doctor here has often emphasized about having as healthy recovery and a healthy life afterward. I think it's a bit disconcerting to place all the emphasis on the sheriff when I understand that you commissioners do approve the sheriff's department budget and they are county employees. So I do understand there are some nuances there. However, when you have these ACEs scores being run through our jail system, and we have over 70% of our jails nationwide are individuals that are mental health and substance abuse involved, and they have become the primary mental health services providers, including substance abuse addiction, then why not focus more on the opportunities we can allow there? And if we can't focus on the jails and hold the jail accountable for its actions, then what are we doing with all of our law enforcement entities that are within the county, not just the sheriff's office, the city, all of those groups, and backing them to make sure that there's diversion on the front end to avoid criminal justice involvement so that someone can reach recovery and not have to go through all of these hurdles in order to even get there when they're ripe and ready to be there.
microphone. I heartily appreciate, I think, training on every level is of utmost importance, awareness, recognizing the same old will not go. And, you know, North Carolina law is frustrating in that we can only do so much, but we can ask hard questions, and as citizens, we can ask all those hard questions. You know, a horrible extreme of overarching control by the sheriff is Sheriff Arpaio, and we don't have that here. Everybody wants the same intent, but I think to your point, we have to ask hard questions, we have to see facts, we have to understand what training everyone has. We've had some real heartbreak at the jail recently, and nobody wanted that to happen, and training and education is paramount for me.
Sir, you've been so patient.
Yes, ma'am. Is this thing working? Yeah, I'm very patient. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I help kids in special kids in school and advocated for them. I think the thing that is being missed here is we can't fix it for sure, but the Buncombe County Commissioners have done a great job for years putting things in place for Buncombe County, and most of the people in this room probably don't even know what resources we do have already. And the thing that bothers me is when you said the 25 to 35-year-old people are the ones that we're targeting. Well, when I look back 16 years ago, when the mental health reform come in, and they promised us over at Mayheck this big hoopla that we were going to reverse this thing and we were going to get something good for our people, that's including the medical and everybody involved. The state of North Carolina lied to us. So we come up with these mental health MCOs, and what happened? They cut the legs off of the services, they defunded everything, and now they're defunding and going to take out the MCOs, but they don't have anything to replace it with. So what's going to happen? It's going to come over to this physical side now, and the hospital is building this big, huge monster of a hospital over here, and we're going to see that the hospital is going to start taking care of what we call behavioral health. That's coming. So now, what we want to think about is this. Do you think we'd be sitting in this room today if the middle class and the top end class of people hadn't been affected by what we're talking about tonight? We wouldn't be sitting in this room. Okay? Now, the state legislators, and I'm glad we got one here, she can take it back. The state has looked at the Medicaid to the point that those people on Medicaid is the one that's being served through the MCO. So when you look at those numbers, they're small in comparison to the problem that we're looking at. They're only looking at Medicaid. You look at the St. Mission Hospital, 75% Medicaid money and dollars going in there, but we can't even see the books of what the hospital is doing. This nonprofit is sitting on billions of dollars, and they ought to be coming up with a way to fund some of this stuff.
Thank you. So I'm going to invite Ann Seaman up here. She just wanted to say a few words.
That's a little over most people's head. That's the reason I don't get a clap.
Tech for allowing us to have this forum here, and I hope this is one of many. Thank you.
First, I'd like to thank Dr. Hoffman and the Mayheck team for their efforts to educate our community. Thank you to the County Commission and its staff for making this issue a priority. I appreciate that. And to thank AV Tech for their commitment to helping students succeed even when they face substance challenges. Lastly, I want to thank my husband. He's been very patient. A stepson wasn't always easy to deal with and very being supportive of me. Curious, inquisitive, self-assured. These are the traits that I remember most about Stuart as a teenager. Stuart was a promising student. In high school, he was enrolled in AP classes in the 9th grade. He finished his freshman year with an unweighted 4.0 GPA, and he had academic awards in his sophomore year. But something was missing. There was just not a lot of excitement in his daily activities. He just needed to feel more. In high school, Stuart started to pillage medicine cabinets of his grandparents and any other home where there was opportunity. His grades began to deteriorate, and he did graduate, but barely. Stuart did not start out a heroin addict. Nobody does. Access to pills of every description were readily available in the homes of friends and relatives and in the school lunchroom. Stuart sought help with his opioid dependency more times than I can remember. It is exhausting for me to recount all of the ER visits, psychiatric hospitalizations, inpatient and outpatient drug treatment facilities, and it was exhausting for Stuart. Stuart was in no condition to fully advocate for himself. Like so many others, the damage to his brain rendered him incapable of always acting in his own best interest. Stuart's choice to not use available medication to treat his addiction, in fact, left him vulnerable. He could not will away the disease, and he was unable to articulate how desperate he was for relief. When our suffering friends and family ask for our help, we need to offer the full menu of options, free of shame and stigma. I would not ask my father, who suffers from emphysema, to forego oxygen because he smoked cigarettes in his past. Why would I discourage anyone with opioid dependence from seeking medication-assisted treatment when they clearly cannot function without it? Our community no longer has the luxury of time for trial and error solutions. The stakes have dramatically increased with the introduction of fentanyl and carfentanil into the mix. Why do I choose to speak about this very painful topic? I do it because I sincerely believe that this is not your father's addiction. It is very different, and it requires, no, it demands a different solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please take away the message that nobody chooses heroin. Nobody chooses this path. What we need now is empathy and innovation, and we need to pressure everyone that has the ability and power of a pen to allocate funds for research and treatment, because this is all of us. This is our community. And I heartily thank Mayhack, Sunrise, all the heroes in this room for being willing to show up and talk about this. And when everybody said the status quo isn't good enough, we have to push the envelope and go into uncharted waters, because one more person dying is way too much. So thank you all for being here. Thank you.
I know you guys are about to leave, but I did want to add really quick that I am so grateful to live in Buncombe County, because I've lived in other places and sought treatment and it's not available, not like it is here. The wealth of resources available, if you search for it, is abundant in Buncombe, and there's just so much. If you have a question, call 211, call VIA. You know, the help is available, but you gotta ask for it.